All right, Larry Kruger here from the Pig and a Pickle Krug Show with a little 49er video on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 2024. And of course, we're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Pig and a Pickle. We're also brought to you by Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles. Give Anthony Catania a call at 831-521-5264. And we're also brought to you by valleyhillroofing.net. They're at 209-481-6851. Both website links are in the description. Well, we've maintained this for several weeks that despite what the numbers may say about the 49er defense, that my sense of it was that Steve Wilks was going to be a one-and-done guy, and sure enough, Steve Wilks is a one-and-done guy. Now, if you look at the numbers, the Niners allowed, 17.5 points per game. That's third in the league. So it wasn't like they had some disaster defense. They were eighth in total defense, which is yards per game. They gave up 303.9 yards per game, eighth in the NFL. So they were top 5 in points allowed. They were top 10 in total defense. They were number 3 against the run, allowing 89.7 yards per game. They were 14th against the pass, 214.2 yards per game. They had 48 sacks overall, which was 7th in the NFL. They had 22 interceptions, which was first, led the NFL with 22 interceptions. And defensively, they were plus 10, or offensively, defensively, a turnover differential, which is both offense and defense. Niners were plus 10, fifth best in the NFL. So Steve Wilks is out. Why is Steve Wilks out? That is the question. And Kyle Shanahan spoke to the media on Wednesday afternoon, saying that he slept on the decision and that he informed Steve Wilks this morning that he's not going to return as defensive coordinator. Shanahan said that he would look at candidates both inside and outside the building. He said he'd like to retain the system that they currently run, which is the wide 9, a version of the 4-3 defense. But he's open to running a different scheme if it makes sense. In fact, his quote to that effect said, "I'm committed to try and find what we believe will give the Niners the best chance in 2024. I'm not closed-minded in any way." So Shanahan said one of the biggest issues with Wilks was that he was so committed to running his style and not what Shanahan wanted that made it difficult to adapt. So, I mean, there was a disconnect here. Steve ran a zero blitz at the end of the first half in Minnesota, and Jordan Addison scored a quick touchdown, and Shanahan went to the podium and said, he screwed that up, and basically made him own it. Then, when the players wanted Steve to not be in the booth but be on the sideline, Shanahan told him, "Hey, you know what? You're going to be in the booth. You're going to be on the sideline. You're not going to be in the booth." So he told him that as well. So you look at this relationship. There was a call in the Super Bowl where Shanahan called a timeout. He clearly didn't like the blitz or didn't like the defensive play call. He hardly ever does that, but he did it in the Super Bowl. And it just said, there were reports that Shanahan was more involved with the defensive game plan than he's been in the past. So, there's been, some dissatisfaction from Kyle's standpoint with Steve Wilks. Then you look at Wilks's, his football card, if you want, or if you look him up on Wikipedia or whatever. He's been in about 20 different spots in the last 25 years. So he typically goes and moves and goes and moves. That's been his trend. So I'm not sure why he does, if he chooses to or if he doesn't choose to, if he wears on people. I don't know. I have no idea. He seemed like a good enough guy to me. But he does have a lot of stops, let's just say that, and a lot of different jobs. And he hasn't been in one place for very long. at any point in his career. So I think this is more about the 49ers, wanting to find the right guy who can, exist in their scheme. There were times where they were dialing up pressure up front, and yet the coverage was 5 yards off the receivers. So it's clear to me that there were several times this year where the coverage and the rush were not married together. And yet I don't understand that, because Steve told me that he calls all the games up front and all the stunting and twisting, that was all him on game day, that he's the guy who made those calls. So if you're that in tune with the fronts that you're calling stunts and twists and playing games up front, you would think you would always have that totally 100% tied to your whatever your defensive call was. So, I mean, what good is it to speed up the quarterback? And I saw this in the Cincinnati game where they tried to speed up the quarterback, and yet they played a soft coverage underneath, and the quarterback just, quickly got rid of it to wide open guys 8 and 10 yards away. I mean, I saw that in the Cincinnati game, and I thought to myself, what is going on here? Why is the coverage not tied to the rush? And it made no sense when Steve said that he's the guy who calls the games up front. So at least he's got some kind of knowledge and control over what kind of front he's got, and he called the coverage on the back end. So, at the time, I'm thinking to myself, well, how is that not linked together if you're calling the games up front and you're calling the coverage on the back end? So anyway, Shanahan would not rule out any in-house replacement. There's passing game and Nichols coach Nick Sorensen. Then there's also guys that have incredible resumes, guys like Mike Vrabel. Heck, if you wanted to shoot for the moon, you could pay a big check to Bill Belichick and see if he'd come over and be your defensive coordinator. I suggested that over a month ago just because I figured, you know what? Belichick is not going to be a head coach. I don't believe that he's like everybody else. I think he's a little different than everybody else. The average coach in his spot would say, oh, I want those extra wins as a head coach. I want that glory. But you know what? He's not great with the media. He's not a great personnel evaluator. What he's truly great at is he is the best defensive coach out there. And what he's really the most spectacular at maybe ever is he's the best defensive backfield coach that the league's seen in years. I mean, he's right there with Ray Rhodes, George Seifert, Bud Carson. I mean, you talk about the greatest DB coaches, Dick LeBeau. Belichick is one of the very, very best at developing a secondary and running the show. I mean, as far as on the defensive side, but coordinating, getting top tier defensive play. I'll tell you the move that I wouldn't mind seeing. I mean, it would be the home run move. But if you could somehow get Bill Belichick to convince his young safety, who's a free agent in New England, Kyle Duggar, to sign with the 49ers, and you could bring in Duggar, get rid of Gibson, move in Duggar, have Bill as the defensive coordinator, and you look at all those young DBs you have. You've got Lenore, Ambry, Jair, Hufanga, Luter, Womack. You've got 6 young DBs that would totally benefit from, a guy like Duggar and a coordinator like Belichick. So that would be the home run move. I don't know that they can get Belichick to do that. Belichick and Shanahan, do have a mutual respect for one another. That would be the move. That would be the move. You want to make get people focused on next year and go get Bill Belichick to coordinate this defense and develop these 6 young DBs. You've done the work, right? Womack, Luter, Jair, Hafanga, Lenore, Ambry, they're all NFL talents. There's no question about it. They need to be developed, and they need and be coached up. And you get those 6 young DBs coached up the right way, and you bring in a guy like Bill and let him be the defensive czar. And if you want to run that wide 9 within his scheme, do it. But that's the move. That's the move to make. That's the move that I suggested over a month ago. People said it was crazy at the time. It still sounds crazy. I get it. I understand. It's just, you're talking about one of the greatest head coaches of all time, and you're suggesting he be the defensive coordinator of the 49ers. And you're like, what? No way. Why would he ever do that? But that's kind of what he's best at, and that's what he's really, really good at, which is coaching DBs and coaching defense. That would be the home run move. That would be the absolute home run move. And if he could get Kyle Duggar to come with him, now you've got some premier young safety that you could play, in a 3-safety look with Afanga and Jair. Odom's your special teamer. You let Gibson walk. I think that's the move that I would make. And then you're locked up on your defensive side of the ball. Your secondary's much more promising, and then from there, you've got the draft to rebuild your defensive front, and get an offensive lineman. I mean, you need a top-tier tackle, and you probably need 2 offensive linemen, and you need 3 or 4 defensive linemen out of this draft, probably just because look at all the guys that could be leaving. Young, Gregory, Kinlaw, Givens, Farrell, Burks, Sebastian Joseph Day. All those guys are free agents. So they're all in your front 7. So that's going to be an interesting thing. But as far as Wilks, I would like to say I'm surprised, but I've been predicting this. I think he's a good defensive coordinator. He knows defensive football. It obviously was not a good fit. The one thing that Kyle has to have is he's got to have total belief and trust in his defensive coordinator, and he just didn't. And so that's a problem. I think Kyle would like to just be the offensive guy and not have to worry at all about his defense. And I don't think he was able to do that this year. I think he had concerns about Wilks. I don't think they saw eye to eye. To me, you can't replace him with nobody, though. You can't just be like, well, we promoted our backup defensive backfield coach, and he's going to be the guy. I think if you're gonna take away a guy with the credentials and the history in the league that Steve has, you got to replace him with a guy who the players day one say, absolutely, this guy's better. Absolutely, this was the right move. So you can't replace him with somebody who's like you're giving a first go-round to. It has to be somebody with a track record and a resume of success, of having success on the defensive side of the ball, and the players have to buy in right away. I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think Shanahan will find somebody that has a big name, or at least a big, has a lot of experience. Vrabel would be incredible. As I said, the hoodie would be the target. He would be the absolute target. Darryl Tapp, also the assistant D-line coach, is headed to the Commanders to go with Anthony Lynn. You wonder there if maybe, Tapp, who is the assistant to Chris Kasarik, if maybe they're going to make some changes even to the front and to the wide 9, and so Tapp's out. So he's now going to be, I'm sure, the D-line coach instead of the assistant D-line coach with the Commanders. So that's another one. That's another loss for the 49ers. So, it's funny. I'm reading this article on Niners Nation, and they say most of Wilks' in-season press conferences were awkward, where he often apologized for something from the week prior. It's tough to ignore the disconnect that stared us in the face all season. Yeah, it just felt like he was on shaky ground almost all year. It just felt like he was on shaky ground. And yet he adapted to somebody else's system. And if you look at the numbers, You're still talking about a defense that as we said before, top 10 in total defense, top 5 in points allowed per game. He can argue that he did his job, but ultimately the head coach has to believe in you. And I think Kyle is right when he says that there were times where the front and the back end were not tied together. And, your defense has to be tied together. The zero blitz on the last play in the Minnesota game, on the touchdown to Jordan Addison was a terrible, terrible call. And Shanahan was getting, according to the reports I read, was getting more and more hands-on with the defensive game plans throughout the playoffs. So there you go. Steve Wilks is out after 1 year. The Niners looking both internally and externally for his replacement. A lot of people have suggested Mike Vrabel. I've thrown out Bill Belichick. We will see what direction this goes. But thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krug Show. Thanks to our other sponsors as well. And thanks to all of you guys for supporting the Krug Show. Nearly 40,000 subs on YouTube.